So I watched the Netflix documentary, Take Your Pills. I have a lot of thoughts. Now, this one definitely hits close to home for me. I guess I'll start with, I think the documentary is at its strongest when it talks about societal issues and talks about a culture of Adderall culture, because I think that any kind of problems with over-diagnosis of ADD, over-prescription of Adderall, and abuse of Adderall, for me, it comes from issues with our culture and it comes from issues with the mindsets that people have rather than anything inherent to the substance. So let me clarify. I think Adderall as a substance, it has the potential for huge benefits for people who are having trouble managing their life, getting on a good sleep schedule, holding down a job. It can have life transformative effects that can completely change your life, allow you to get married, have kids, avoid prison, do all these wonderful things. And for most people, it has very, very minor side effects compared to other things, compared to something like birth control. It is nowhere near the severity of side effects and the percentage of people that do get the side effects. It's really low compared to something like Xanax. Xanax, I think, unless you suffer from debilitating panic attacks and you're using Xanax to actually stop yourself from having a panic attack, I don't think Xanax should ever be prescribed. And I think the side effects are so horrendous. The withdrawals are so bad. The physical dependence is so bad. And the percentage of people that are going to get addicted to Xanax who have taken it regularly, it's a majority. It's an overwhelming majority. Compare that to Adderall, the number of people who get addicted to that, it's so minor. So I don't think that Adderall is an inherently bad substance at all. I think the world is better off that it exists. I think the amount of people that it helps and really changes their lives is huge. I think the amount of people that they look at their life and they say, wow, when I took Adderall, that's where it all went wrong. If it hadn't been for Adderall existing, I would have had a completely different life. I think its non-existence is zero. I think the number of people who could say the same thing about opiates, Xanax, a bunch of different substances, or even some antidepressant medication, who could look at them starting to taking that and saying, wow, that was the point where things started to come apart that had a really negative impact on my life, I think is huge. So when the documentary talks about parental expectations and putting pressure on kids, Mozart in the womb, things like that, and having this kind of competitive race to the bottom society of success, I think it's at its strongest. And when you look at the Olympics and we look at sports, the reason they put restrictions on steroid use and all these substances is because they understand that if they didn't have those restrictions, who wins at the Olympics, it would no longer be about any kind of skill, any kind of inborn skill, or any kind of hard work, or any kind of really effective coaching mechanisms. No, the people who win would be the most fearless, the most daredevils, the people who are willing to put their bodies through whatever kind of drug regimen it takes to achieve success. And that's why they put these regulations in place, because they don't want to turn it into something like professional bodybuilding, where if you look at professional bodybuilding, the people who win, the people at the top level, to an extent is discipline, but for the most part, it's people who are willing to put their bodies through such horrific things in order to achieve that level of success. So if you look at it more broadly, if you look at something like Wall Street, I wouldn't be opposed to maybe you could look at putting in some kind of regulations between how many hours people are allowed to work, what kind of substances people are willing to ingest. Because if you don't, then if you look at our society, the people who are the CEOs, the people who are at the top in the business world, they're not the people who are the most talented, the most bright, who are the most hardworking. Well, in some sense, the most hardworking, but they're the people who are willing to put their own body through whatever it takes, caffeine, long hours, not sleeping, not going to the gym, not exercising, and also are willing to do whatever it takes to other people, just be ruthless and stab other people in the back. So when you look at what kind of society we want, what kind of role models we want, if we don't have any kind of restrictions, and if basically we set it up where the people who are getting to the top are the people who have no family life, no hobbies, no nothing, all they do is work and take stimulants all day, well then it's not much to aspire to. And then we have a situation where the illusion might be, the illusion is the people on top. Well, they're the most creative, they're the most talented. But the reality is, no, it's just the people who are willing to sacrifice themselves and anyone else to get to the top. And for me, when you come to the question of, well, why are so many people on it? Why are rates skyrocketing? I think rates are skyrocketing because it allows these drugs, they allow you to do things that you don't want to do. They allow you to stick with boring tasks. And I think for the first time, or more than at any other time in history, we have a huge amount of the population that are doing things that they don't like doing. And they're doing things consistently on a daily basis that they don't want to do, they don't enjoy doing, they don't get any value of doing. And a lot of people want to be the best. And we have a kind of competition and kind of race to be productive that also hasn't really existed at any other time. There's never been a time where we felt so aware of other people around us and how we're doing relative to other people, and we're constantly looking at our friends, other people in our grade, and we're constantly trying to edge out other people at a kind of global scale throughout the country, but also at a local scale, just in your own workplace. You're always jockeying for position. That was very different at a time where there wasn't such social mobility. There wasn't this kind of drive to be as productive and as good as you can be. You were a tailor, or you made shoes, you worked at a haberdashery, you did whatever you did, and there wasn't this kind of endless striving and relentless ambition. You basically had your lot in life, and that was it. Now, there's huge problems with that system, but it doesn't lead to the same desire to take performance-enhancing substances all the time. So if you look at a time in the past where you had a bunch of people who were farmers, you had people in the coal mines, you had people going off to war, you had people doing all these different things, or you had a huge section of the population that were homemakers. And if you're on if you're a homemaker, there's really no need to be on Adderall, on any of these performance-enhancing substances. You compare it to now, where the vast majority of people now, both genders, are in these desk jobs, these white-collar 9-to-5 jobs, or service jobs, whatever, or in college, and you have this massive amount of people, more people than ever, now going to college, sitting in classrooms, which for the most part, they don't enjoy their classes, they don't pay attention in their classes, but they feel like, no, they got to do these classes because they got to get a degree, and then they got to get the job. So we have this huge amount of people now doing things they don't really like doing. That's where the demand for Adderall and these different drugs are coming from. I don't believe that it's an artificial desire planted by clever marketing campaigns. I haven't been exposed to many marketing campaigns for Adderall or about ADD. I wish that there were more of those. I know it's controversial to say, but I wish more people knew about ADD. For me growing up, I always associated ADD with a learning disability and with people who were struggling in class, couldn't finish assignments. So for me, it was hard for me to get diagnosed. It was hard for me to see those signs in myself because I associated it with having trouble learning. I didn't think I had trouble learning, so I never got the help that I needed. Had I actually seen a checklist for ADD, and had there not been that stigma where it's associated with getting bad grades, failing at school, had there not been that stigma, and had I just looked at a checklist, it would have clicked instantly that, yeah, this all applies to me. So of course I understand the pharmaceutical companies, there's a profit motive and they want to make money, but there's those same flawed incentives with Cialis, Viagra, antidepressant pills, birth control pills, cholesterol pills, beta blockers. There's the same incentive for them to sell any pills, and there's so many pills out there. So the documentaries like this that zero in on Adderall and try to make it seem like it was this grand concerted conspiracy to foist these pills on people. No, I think pharmaceutical industry has a lot of problems, but these problems are widespread throughout all these different services they sell to people that people may not need. It may be overprescribed for them to zero on an Adderall, specifically when, like I say, side effects of Adderall are relatively minor, and the potential gain from it is so huge and can be life-changing versus so much other crap that people put in their bodies that has no redeeming value or very little redeeming value and big downsides. I don't understand the demonization and the focus on Adderall. And one of the biggest areas I have a disagreement with this documentary is treating Adderall more like a drug. And oftentimes they seem to bemoan the fact that Adderall is considered separate from other drugs and it's considered not as dangerous and harmful. And their argument isn't to destigmatize all drugs. No, it's to stigmatize Adderall more and make us think Adderall is similar on par with meth and cocaine and these other things and should be treated severely like that and should be treated like other drugs. So my problem with that is, let's say for people coming out of prison, I think people in prison, their rates of ADHD and their potential benefit from taking Adderall is much higher than the average population. Oftentimes with ADHD, you're a sensation seeker, you want thrills, you have trouble having a job and having 9-to-5 existence. So within prisons, you're going to have a much higher population of people with ADHD. So for all these people coming out of prison, if you treat Adderall like a drug and you say, well, no, you can't prescribe them Concerta or Vyvanse or Ritalin or whatever because they're just going to sell it, or they're just going to use it, get hooked on it, and it's going to be a gateway back to them using other substances. Well, then you're making it so all these people, you're putting them at a further disadvantage already coming out of prison. It's tougher for you to find a job, all these other things. And then you're also taking this thing that all these other people who have issues with ADHD, they're allowed to take, and they're allowed to use this to get their life straightened out. But you're saying people coming out of prison, no, they can't take it because now you're stigmatizing it like a drug. That's just one example of how thinking of Adderall like a drug rather than like caffeine or coffee, which there's no difference between it except in how you take it, I think is a really bad road to go down. And if you look at the issue of is it overprescribed, I think it's misprescribed, and the documentary gets into this, that I think oftentimes parents, they'll see their kid misbehaving and they'll just conflate that with ADD when it's not. ADD is a specific thing. Not all kids who are problem kids and misbehaving, not all of them have ADD and can benefit from this. In some cases, it'll just make it worse. It also doesn't make you smarter, and I love how the documentary addresses this, that just because your kid's doing poorly in school, that doesn't mean Adderall is the answer. That doesn't mean Adderall is a solution. I think you've got to really understand what ADD is and have people, doctors who understand it and can effectively weed the kids who actually have it from the kids that don't. So I think that misprescribing is a big deal, but I don't think overprescribing is a big deal either. Like I say, I think there's many cases where it's underprescribed. I think that oftentimes with kids, only the kids who are failing and only the kids who are having real severe problems are the ones who get prescribed. There's a bunch, I think that there's lots of kids who get really good grades or get average grades that they also have ADD, but because they're not failing, it never clicks in their minds to actually get tested for it. So you see all these kids who throughout school, they're very smart, so they just breeze through. They never really have to work. They never really have to focus. They never really have to sustain attention. They can get away with procrastinating and all these bad habits because school is very easy for them. And also they can get away with not cleaning their room, not really worrying about getting themselves up in the morning because they're living with their parents and everything's kind of taken care of them. Then they go to college, and for the first time, one, the classes might be a little harder and they actually now have to buckle down and focus and study things that don't interest them and manage their time. And also now they have to live like an adult and do all these adult things that maybe they never learned how to do. And then this is where they start buying these kind of drugs and not getting prescribed for it, and buying Adderall from their friends, turning to drugs, struggling in school, versus if they just got prescribed and diagnosed when they were in high school, none of that would have happened. But I will say, I do think the existence of the education system for 12 years of every kid's life, I think that does lead to a lot of people being prescribed Adderall that may never need it. I think if you want to grow up and be a chef and work in a kitchen, be a line chef and then work in the kitchen, and you might be able to get up at 5 p.m. every day, depending on when the shifts start, you might never need Adderall. You might have ADD, but you might live a lifestyle that you can live an awesome, fulfilled life and never really need this medication. So I think that when you create a thing where every kid has to get up every day at a certain time, has to go study things they don't want to study, that's in some ways an artificial environment you're creating that's not reflective of everybody's life. Not everybody's going to go and for the next 60 years of their life live an environment where they need to sit at a desk and they need to read books that they're not interested in. So when you prescribe to someone something that's not going to be their daily life, that could be problematic, and you may be doing that kid a disservice if they do feel they become dependent on it and then they go live the rest of their life, whether they're a plumber or any one of these number of jobs where they might not need it. So I do think it is problematic that all kids, they have to go through this system that may not be ideal to their needs and get put on this drug that maybe, depending on their life, they may or may not need. Last thing on the overprescribing and just how many people are actually on these stimulants, it's still a relatively small number. It's still a minority. It's a significant enough minority that I think some of the stigma is getting reduced, but it's still a minority. I think a lot of these students who, they're college students, and they show them in the documentary, and they're like, oh, all my friends are on it. Well, that's because they're your friends, and people don't realize that the people they hang out with, they're not representative of the general population. You hang out with those people, and they may be on Adderall because they're competitive like you. They're also in very high pressure situations and programs. They're maybe have looser morals or more open-minded than you. For whatever reason, you've self-selected, and your friend group, yeah, lots or the majority of people may take it, but that's not representative at all of just average people if you just grab a selection of just the general population. So I think the documentary does a disservice when it shows these kids and they say, well, everyone at college is taking it. No, it's even at college, even at these high pressure situations, it's still a minority. And then I want to talk about how this documentary talks about the side effects and compares it to other drugs. This is where the documentary is at its worst. So first of all, it uses the same tactics against Adderall that all these absurd anti-drug organizations use against all drugs. And they say things like, oh, it causes psychosis, it causes heart problems. Now, again, technically, it's a stimulant, so it raises your heart rate. So, yeah, it could cause heart problems, theoretically, but so can caffeine, so can any stimulant, so can ginseng. So, again, it's a thing where technically, yes, it's true. it could, but it doesn't in the vast majority of cases, in the vast majority of doses. So when you say that, you're being disingenuous. And when they compare it to meth and they say, well, chemically it's very similar to meth, yeah, it is. So, but the answer to that is to realize that with meth use, the problem is how you use it, whether you use it injecting it or smoking it or even snorting it versus swallowing it, which is how you take Adderall orally. So, and the thing with meth is when you use it constantly and then you live an unhealthy lifestyle, you forget to eat, you stay up for days on end. That's where the issues with meth comes. It doesn't come with inherent to the chemical structure. So when you say, oh, look, Adderall and meth, chemically they're very similar, the answer is not, oh my God, Adderall is terrible and it's just as bad as smoking crack cocaine or doing heroin or any of these things. We need to ban it. We need to stigmatize it. No, the answer is, oh, okay, now I know a little more about meth and how it's the way you take it and it's the lifestyle you live that causes a lot of the problems with meth. It's not inherent to the chemical formula. And then they talk about LSD microdosing as a possible alternative. So first of all, if you say that Adderall can cause psychosis or heart palpitations and heart problems, well then obviously acid or mushrooms, you could say horrible things about the side effects of that. I don't care what dose you're using. If you say that Adderall can cause psychosis and a break from reality, well then microdosing LSD or mushrooms can obviously cause psychosis or heart problems. So by, again, buying into using all those same shitty arguments about the side effects of Adderall, you've opened up the exact same people who want to ban acid, ban mushrooms. So you're talking out of both sides of your mouth and kind of undercutting your own arguments. Also, ADHD is a daily problem. You have problems with your dopamine on a daily basis. So if you're making the argument that microdosing LSD, that's something you can possibly do daily or even every other day, that's a very irresponsible argument to make. Microdosing LSD is really cool, but that's maybe once a week something you could do. That's not something where you could work a 9-to-5 job every day and be microdosing LSD. So it's just a really weird argument to make. And when you say things like, well, Adderall's pharmaceutical and LSD and mushrooms, well, those are natural. Again, it's just this silly semantic games you want to play. By the same logic, you say, well, mushrooms are natural and LSD is an acid, so that's bad, that's chemicals. So this was, again, I hate to be attacking, someone talking about microdosing LSD in a documentary, but they brought it up in a context that it didn't make any sense, and I thought it was kind of irresponsible. And then last thing I'll talk about, they kept bringing up this idea of the ethics of it, and someone said on the documentary, and people said this a bunch of times, well, it makes me bummed out that I didn't achieve this goal. It was me and the Adderall. So was it really fair? Like, did I cheat to get something? For me, that just brings up the whole idea of feeling like proud of things and feeling like you want to take ownership that I was responsible and I get the credit and I get the glory. That's just problematic thinking at a fundamental level, because once you really start poking at the philosophy of like, what do we deserve? Well, you don't choose your genes, you didn't choose your parents. Yeah, you might have worked hard, but you didn't choose to be born with this drive to work hard and this ambition. So at a deep down fundamental level, you're not really responsible for anything. If you really want to talk philosophically, for you to get really proud of what you achieve and look down on other people and see yourself as better because you achieved and other people didn't, philosophically it's kind of problematic. So Adderall that's just a symptom of it. Like if you want to feel, if you want to feel really proud of your achievements and you feel like Adderall screws up you feeling proud, well, I mean, it's ego. You should live your life how you want to live. You should spend your time how you want to spend it. But as soon as you start, setting these goals, and not even setting goals, society setting these goals and then getting these ego boosts and feeling really good from achieving these goals, I think you've kind of just gone down a bad path. And for you should really work on, not feeling like you should be taking so much pride in what you achieve and kind of being more humble and realizing that a lot of what you achieve, you had a lot of advantages and a lot of it's luck, a lot of it's other people. And, you should live your life and have hobbies and do the things you want to do. But yeah, you shouldn't be taking pride and be like, oh, well, Adderall is unfair. Well, a lot of things are unfair. It's not just Adderall. Is it fair that some people are on Adderall and some people are not? Maybe not, but is it fair that some people are born with ADD and with low dopamine and other people are not? Well, that's not fair either. Is it fair that some people were born 6'2" and they're in the NBA and then they're like, oh, well, I feel like it's unfair for me to take Adderall and get this advantage. Well, it's also unfair for you to be born 6'2", and everyone else to be born 5'4", and they can't be in the NBA. So it's just, again, to take Adderall and be like, well, Adderall is unfair when our entire existence is unfair. There's nothing fair about anything. And to be like, well, to again just scapegoat Adderall and just pick out Adderall to pick on, I just don't understand it. So on the video there, if I wanted to sum up why I guess I found this so frustrating, I believe that ADD exists. It's basically low dopamine. I think that there's people born with low dopamine. It's a real thing. I have it. I can talk about it, what it's like. And I just wish that they spent all the time and effort making an hour-and-a-half documentary about low dopamine and about ADD and about the signs and about the symptoms, because it's fascinating. There's a lot to talk about, and I think that a documentary about that, where people could actually watch and actually see, wow, that a lot of that speaks true to me. Maybe I have it. Maybe this friend, that a lot of it reminds me of them. And I just think that would be much better use of everyone's time, because I think that as much as everyone talks about Adderall and ADD, and as much as people talk about it being widespread, there's still not a lot. People don't know a lot about it, and people still misunderstand it a lot. So I think we need more information and more awareness about it, and that would be just a better use of resources than a documentary that talks about Adderall being like meth and Adderall and big pharma. And this is a minor point, but I'll just say it. Towards the end of the documentary, there's a former NFL player, and his wife's filming, and she says, in very serious tones, do you wish you never took that Ritalin? Like, do you wish you could go back and not take that Ritalin? And I just, like, why? I don't understand. It's not like him taking Ritalin set him down this dark path and that he's still trying to pull himself out of. No, he was a football player. He was on Adderall. He took a Ritalin, which he shouldn't have, because you're allowed to take prescribed medications. You're not allowed to take unprescribed. So he took a Ritalin. He got caught, and it seemed to have contributed to ending his football career. It has nothing to do with Ritalin being a bad thing, or Ritalin being like the thing that brought down his life. The rule and him not following the rule brought down his life. So I just felt like this documentary, it was all about making it catchy and pulling people in, and like, oh, let's talk about LSD microdosing. That's hip right now. There's articles written about that. Is LSD microdosing? Is anyone seriously saying that that's an alternative to ADD medication? That's a thing that people could take on a regular basis as an alternative to ADD medication? I don't even think the people making this documentary would argue that. They just put it in because it's cool. And again, it is cool. And I like people talking about it. I like people talking about it, just not in this context. I think is not a good idea to bring it up in this context for anyone. So when they talk about society and talk about how if everyone was on Adderall and everyone was just focused and constantly working, and there was no time to let your mind wander and just have free flow of ideas and these moments of human connection and creativity and art, completely agree with them talking about societal issues and kind of what we should value as a society, and the problem with competitiveness and productivity and focus on that. When they talk about actually what is Adderall like chemically, what are Adderall's effects on the body, documentary doesn't do a good job, at least in my opinion.